means there's no direction and there's no hope. That's the problem.
Right.
It's weird because you've attained your goal, but now you're directionless and technically you're hopeless.
Having an affair with their tennis coach, and their life really falls apart.
Yeah, right.
And here's the thing. Here's the thing, Jordan. Woe be unto the man whose dreams come true, because he will find that he had the wrong dreams.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Will you be right? What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today I have an interesting conversation between Dr. Jordan Peterson and Dr. Arthur Brooks. They discuss the aspects of goal attainment and life satisfaction and some of the pitfalls psychologically and philosophically that we can find ourselves when we actually do meet our goals. Very interesting. I think you're going to be very surprised on some of the aspects that they bring out. And I know this video was interesting to me. I hope it's interesting to you. Let's get into it.
One of the things that I really tried to delve into was Jacob's vision.
Yeah.
It's very cool, because Jacob, when he has the vision of Jacob's ladder, Jacob's a bad guy.
Yeah.
He's in collusion with his Oedipal mother.
His mother,
he's deceived his father. He's betrayed his brother. He's a mama's boy. He's intellectually arrogant. He's a coward. He's a bad guy.
Unlikable character.
It sounds like the state of a lot of young men today. You know, a lot of these single parent homes, they grow without fathers, and they really don't learn how to really hone in into their adventure spirit. That's interesting that he was explaining that about Jacob.
Yeah, yes, exactly. But then he leaves, and he decides that he's going to be good. He's going to try to be good.
Right.
That's when he has that dream. Now, the thing that's cool about the dream that's relevant to our discussion is that, so you have this Jacob's ladder, which what would you say, spirals up into the ineffable, right? You can't see the pinnacle. The pinnacle is wherever God is, but you can't see that. And the reason I think that that's relevant and important is because of the paradox that you just described. If you reach your goal, you satiate the system and the motivational framework disappears.
Right.
Right? So that...
What Jordan is saying is once you reach your goal, you lose all motivation for anything else. As far as, you know, if you're in a position where you do have a son or a daughter, and, you know, one of the anecdotes to get them out of that, just not going anywhere in life, is just challenge them to do something different, an adventure, go away for a weekend, figure things out, do something you've never done, take some risks you've never done. Sometimes that jump starts that spirit to try to get your life in order.
It means there's no direction and there's no hope. That's the problem.
Right.
It's weird because you've attained your goal, but now you're directionless and technically you're hopeless, because hope comes in consequence of positive emotion in relationship to a goal. So actually what you want, you might think that paradise is the land of milk and honey, so to speak, that it's the land of infinite satiation. But the problem with that is satiation destroys the frame and destroys hope. So actually what you want is a sequence of expanding goals with no upper limit. And that's exactly what you see in Jacob's ladder. It's like, so you climb, this is different than Sisyphus, right? Sisyphus pushes the rock up the hill and then it rolls back down the same hill.
Right.
It's like, no, what you actually want is a mountain. And then when you get to the top of that, you can see another mountain. And then when you get to the top of that, you can see another one.
So it's an interesting point Dr. Jordan Peterson and Dr. Arthur Brooks are making. Essentially, what he's saying is the goal isn't to actually reach your goal, as counterintuitive as that is. I mean, how many times do they tell all of us when we're growing up, hey, you know, meet your goal, you can reach your dream, etc. But in reality, what they're saying is that shouldn't be your aim, is to reach your goal, because then there's no motivation for anything else. And essentially never expect to meet your goal, but more focus on the adventure of trying to reach it. It sounds counterintuitive, but let's keep listening.
And that never comes to an end. So that would be an inexhaustible source of motivation and hope.
Yeah.
And it is independent, in a way, it's independent of accomplishment, because there is no final goal.
Right.
But you don't want there to be a final goal, because then you run into the problem of the paradoxical problem of satiation, right? And it is also...
Or just satisfaction, you know, and comfort. And what does that really bring? Nothing ever grows in comfort. And so that's what they're talking about, that satiation.
Range. And you were touching on this, that one of the really weird things about human beings is that we're far more seeking oriented than satiation oriented, right? Is that we do want the adventure, we want the craving, we want the desire.
The progress.
Yeah, and the progress.
Progress.
More than we want the
goal.
attainment. Yeah, absolutely. You know, like I had a client once, I had a funny conversation with him. He had this dream of retiring when he was like 50, you know, and he had a pretty cut and dried, ordinary, algorithmic job, you know, and so it was okay, but it wasn't a thrill. It wasn't the meaning of his life, you know. And I said, well, what's your vision for retirement? And he said, well, I imagine being on a beach in the Caribbean with like a Mai Tai in my hand. And I thought, well, that's a travel poster, not a plan. And so I talked to him about it. I said, well, look, you're like a middle-aged white guy. You're going to sit on the damn beach for one day, and you're going to be so sunburned, you're going to have to hide for 2 weeks.
Right.
And then what are you going to do? You're going to drink like 5 Mai Tais a day or 20? For how long?
Right.
You're going to be an alcoholic in no time flat. You've got no orientation or goal. There was nothing to it at all, right?
Good luck on your divorce.
Well, right.
I mean,
And your cirrhosis.
These guys at Goldman have told.
Haven't you ever heard of some of those stories where people, you know, reach retirement and 3 to 5 months later they pass away? I think there's something there of Jordan and Dr. Arthur Brooks, what they're discussing, that maybe is tied to a little bit of that, and maybe the importance of us as human beings to be always some sort of purpose, some sort of goal. It doesn't even necessarily have to be a massive one, but just something. It seems in the therapy room, the people who struggle the most are the ones that don't have any direction. And that can happen in a lot of situations, a lot of families. They make their family, the kids grow up, get an empty nest, and all of a sudden they got to think about other things, other goals, other purposes, and that can cause a lot of tension. That can cause a lot of divorces, actually. What I've seen in my practice.
Told me this for years and years. So you can make a bunch of money in fitness, of course. If you're smart and you're motivated and you have your MBA and you come out like raring to go. By 49, you have $400 million. And I've seen this again and again and again. The people that I've worked with, I'm privileged to work with. They retire at 49. Why? Because they don't like their work. Their work is backbreaking, and they can't see their families, and they don't have love in their lives. But they've lost their chops on actually how to do these things because the plot has been lost in their lives, and so they retire at 49. And then they become very good at golf or tennis. And they get a nice dark tan. And pretty soon they're having an affair with their tennis coach, and then their life really falls apart. And here's the thing. Here's the thing, Jordan. Woe be unto the man whose dreams come true, because he will find that he had the wrong dreams.
Exactly.
Wow, what a powerful statement. Woe be the man who accomplishes his dream, because he might find out he had the wrong dream. And I think in a lot of ways, a lot of people who do accomplish things, they find out, you know, what's after that. You know, and they look back at what they've done, and you have to measure and look at what it means to you. And a lot of times for people, it doesn't mean as much as they thought it would. When they actually accomplish that. That's a real powerful quote. I really, really like that.
Exactly.
This is a real problem.
Well, that's also part and parcel of the call to religious humility. It's like, I want to get what I want. It's like, what makes you so sure you're right about what you want? So I think that notion of, this is something I've been discussing with my wife a lot, because she really learned this in the last few years, is that, so we talked about setting an amorphous uphill goal. Okay, so that's sort of predicated in part. You could think about that as a religious relationship with the unknown. It's sort of predicated on part on your a priori presumption that you don't know finally what's good for you. Now, but what you could want is to learn that and discover it, right? But that's like an ongoing relationship. And what that does is it provides a solution to the problem of you getting what you want and finding out that it wasn't the right thing. Right, because you still want to journey forward. You want to sally forward.
Every time I hear that, the second time I hear it, I just think, what a dreadful experience to actually get to the end and then realize, you know, this wasn't what I thought it would be,
so to speak. But you have to do that in ignorance and humility, and you have to do that understanding that as you make progress, you're going to shift the goal that you're seeking, and that should happen. Because otherwise you run into exactly the paradox that you described.
And you have to recognize that heaven is not on earth. Heaven is in heaven. It's fine if there's an end of the rum line, as long as it's unattainable in this particular life, because we are not geared toward it.
Yeah, well, that's
why heaven is so
observation. Yeah, well, I've thought about that a lot, this notion of life abundant in eternity. Like we tend to read that concretized and think about that as something like life after death, but that's not what it is. It's, as far as I can tell, it's something like the state that exists when you posit an amorphous, indefinite goal as your ultimate goal, because that imbues everything local with a kind of global.
Let me see if I can translate Jordan there. Like I said, Jordan's like math. When you understand it, you love it. When you don't, you hate it. And what I'm understanding that Dr. Jordan Peterson is saying is that heaven is that area where you're in pursuit of goal or many goals or just so many goals that you've placed in your life. All the metaphor they had given you, like once you have a mountain, then after that mountain you have another one, and you're in pursuance of obtaining the unattainable goal. What I'm understanding is if you pause during that adventure, that's the feeling of heaven, is what I'm understanding. What do y'all think? Is he saying that? Let me know in the comments.
Significance, right? I'm pursuing the best, and that's how it's manifesting itself in the moment.
Yeah.
And that's life eternal, because there's an element of it that's timeless. So, in the Sermon on the Mount, it's a guide to what you just described. Christ says, it's very specific. He says, first of all, focus your attention on the highest imaginable.
Right.
Okay, whatever that is. Like, you don't know exactly, right? But it's because it's indefinite and it's ineffable and it's beyond you. But that's what you want to, that's what you're orienting towards. So you establish your, then pay attention to the moment.
Exactly.
Right,
and
right,
let me put one more twist in this.
Okay.
As part of discernment.
Yeah.
So making progress on the realm line is, practically speaking, in worldly terms, having more. Having more of what? More money, power, pleasure, fame, more family relationships, more prestige, whatever it happens to be. But the real twist is not just having more. Satisfaction that you can actually count on in life is not having more of the things that you want. It's wanting less. Haves divided by wants is a much better model.
Yeah, that's an interesting concept, right? We're always motivated for more. And what Dr. Arthur Brooks is saying here is being satisfied with having less is really a lot more satisfactory. And I kind of see that in concept, and I think that goes back to the gratitude, being more grateful that you have whatever you have, and it's okay if you don't have more, is what I'm gathering from what he's saying here.
That's both biblical and psychologically robust. And so the goal should be for all of us, increasing the numerator, having more with respect to our goals, moving on the run line,
right,
and wanting less,
or learning to be so
wanting less.
My wife just did a talk in Salt Lake City, and
how many people do you know in your life that want less? I don't know too many, but I think that comes with life experience, learning from the hard knocks of life, ups and downs. And I think with time, I think you can get to that point, but I don't see a lot of people getting to that point.
What she had focused this talk on was gratitude, and she learned this. She started to practice being grateful when she was dying. It's a very strange time to start practicing being grateful, but one of the things that you can think through when you're in dire straits, this is what happens in the story of Job, by the way, is that, well, imagine everything falls apart for you.
Right.
Okay, now you could ask yourself, how could I make this worse? And the answer to that is, well, I could be resentful and deceitful and arrogant and unhappy and bitter.
Which, by the way, is our psychological baseline. From the Pleistocene, we're evolved toward resentment. We're evolved toward anger and fear, because there's more tissue in the brain devoted to negative affect in the limbic system of the brain, as opposed to positive affect, because
it's protective.
It keeps you alive.
Yeah, so what they're saying there, for those that aren't familiar with the limbic system, they're basically saying that we are designed to be more protective, more self-egotistical because of the amygdala. The amygdala is very preserving. It's always thinking about, how can I get away from this danger? How can I survive? It's a very instinctive part of our minds. And what they're saying is we have more of that. But the interesting part is the story about Job. It's one of my favorite stories in the Bible, because Job just had it all and then he lost it all. But he never lost faith, and he never had a resentful heart. And I see a lot of people in therapy that they get cheated on, they lose their families, they lose their job. And one of the hardest things for them to do is to let go of that resentment. And a lot of times we do figure it out in counseling to let go of that resentment, but there's a lot of work. Resentment, I feel, is a cancer to your emotional well-being.
Yeah, well,
it's like Jordan Peterson exists today because Jordan Peterson's ancestors starting the Pleistocene were resentful. And the result of that is that you're evolved to say, first class on United Airlines has really gone downhill, right? As opposed to, I'm getting there safe and fast. And I'm sitting in the front of the plane. I'm going to get off early and they're going to give me something to eat. It's unbelievable. That's why gratitude is a divine thing.
And it's a practice.
Yeah, and I think when in biblical terms, they talk about how, you don't want to be in the flesh, you want to be in the spirit. And I think from the Christian perspective or the biblical perspective, it's mean like seeking God and, praying to him and submitting this body to a higher call and a higher set of morality, a set of rules of morality and commandments. But in the psychological world, I like to think the flesh translates into ego. You don't really want to be in your ego. At the end of my videos, I always say ego isn't your amigo. And I feel like ego is parallel to flesh. You don't want to live through your ego and let your ego drive. You really want to be in that part of your mind where the limbic system isn't activated, that fight, flight, or freeze. You want to be calm, cool, collected. And that's the place you want to really be. That's the place that's a newer part of your mind. It's not as evolved. It's more evolved than the other parts.
It's managing your effective, evolved state so it doesn't manage you.
Right. So the presumption would be.
Yeah, because if your egos and your limbic system is managing you, then what separates us from the beasts?
Exactly that, is that the default attitude, the default untrained attitude is likely to be overwhelmed by negative emotion and resentful.
Right.
Right, but that isn't fate. You can train yourself out of that, and part of the way you do that, and I saw her do this when she was dying, which was really quite something to see. She decided as an act of will to focus on what she was grateful for and to become an expert at that, right? And that isn't the sort of expertise that modern people tend to think about when they think about expertise, right? Because we think of something like propositional knowledge rather than attitude. But it's definitely the case that you can cultivate, what traditional European Christians, for example, knew that you could cultivate virtue. And that's a very specific phrase, is that cultivation is practice.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Now, this discernment idea.
By the way, one thing,
Yeah.
When your wife was giving that talk on gratitude in the room next door at the same conference as Salt Lake City, my wife was giving a talk on forgiveness. Which is also adapted, which is also standing up to the limits.
Right.
When you're able to let go of someone who hurt you, when you're able to forgive someone, that's why when I'm with my clients, I always ask them, do you have resentment towards whatever person hurt you? They'll say, no, I don't think so. The next question I like to ask is, have you forgiven them? And they'll say, no, I haven't. How can I forgive them? Well, then they have resentment. They go hand in hand, those two, in my opinion.
So forgiveness and gratitude is something you can get better at, according to Dr. Jordan Peterson and Dr. Brooks, which I agree with. I think if you work that muscle, it will get easier to move along when someone hurts you and figure out what we're going to do in our life with our goals. Very interesting video. I wanted to share this with you. If you enjoyed the content, click like and subscribe to the channel. I'd greatly appreciate that. And remember, ego is not your amigo.